Let's discuss those issues of Nigeria's independence and the leadership question after 62 years. We have in the studio a lawyer and a public affairs analyst, Adewale Ajadi. Very warm welcome to Newsnight.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, 62 years after, all you keep hearing in Nigeria is Nigeria has potential. Nigeria, a country that if it were a being, in another 8 years it will become a septuagenarian. Do you still say a septuagenarian has potential?
Well, a 62-year-old country is still very young. Okay. You know, it's a country. But especially looking at what we have achieved in those 62 years is exceptional. At independence, I think the age of survival was about in the 30s. Now we're 55, the highest it's ever been. At independence, the per capita GDP was under $100. Today is over $2,000. There's so many indicators you can look at and see that Nigeria
economically, you think Nigeria, is sure-footed when you look at countries like India, like Pakistan, even China, even Brazil. Our per capita income and GDP was higher. The growth rate, even according to the Brentwood institutions, put Nigeria, far above these countries in the 50s and 60s. What happened?
Well, you can't do a comparison like that. Economically, it doesn't make sense. The context is different. You think about it from one point of view, that Nigeria is number 30 on all economies in the world. It's number 1 in Africa. I'm not saying we've fixed everything. There's no doubt we haven't, and we will never fix everything. But most importantly, we have to appreciate what we have and be able to build on what we have to get to where we want to get to.
Right.
And if we don't do that, you see, the tendency is to have a conversation of zero defect. You're either perfect or completely a failure. Those two things are wrong. We have a presidential candidate who's made his reputation by saying Nigeria has failed. That's totally honest. This is unintelligent. What we need to do is vote for people who know how to build on what we have, on our strengths, and challenge us to improve our weaknesses. But when we play these games, we are politicians, play to the gallery and tell you everything has failed, and we accept this as a conversation for intelligent people, we are also a failure. So we need to start moving the conversation to a more mature conversation where we say, what are we doing well? What do we need to do better? Where do we want to get to?
Right.
What can we give up?
I like the fact that you've touched on that a little bit, because some would say the only reason why this giant of Africa is not, limping as far as it should be limping, or she should be limping, is because of the issue of leadership. So now you've touched a little bit about what some candidates are doing without really calling names particularly. Can you talk to us about the kind of leadership you believe Nigeria needs at this point in time in our nation to take us to that place we deserve to be?
Well, firstly, we have to draw a distinction between office, position, and leadership. We don't draw that distinction. It's possible to be a president and not be a leader, and we have seen that happen. It's possible to have somebody who has authority but does not have leadership. Leadership is the ability to mobilize people, to bring them to the better angels to achieve effectiveness. Leadership is not about good or bad leadership, it's about effective or ineffective leadership. And in the context of Nigeria, I think we are blessed with too many leadership people, but too little people who have effective followership. So what you have often is, whether the leadership is effective or ineffective is another conversation to be had. But everybody wants to be the leader, but very few people want to follow. Now, simply what we have oftentimes is not the problem of one heroic leader. We're looking for a heroic leader. In a complex country like this, that's an impossible task. What we are looking for is better systems. Better systems where people are humble enough to play their role. Let's give an example of a football team. If everybody on the pitch is trying to score, nobody's going to score. You have to organize yourself in such a way.
But that's the essence of the game. that they must score.
Yes, but
And
not everybody's
Not
score.
everyone is
No,
scoring
not
at
everybody's
the
going
same
to
time,
score.
yeah,
You'd have
yeah.
strikers who can score. There'll be people who pass to them. There are people who perform the defensive role. The problem is everybody's trying to play exactly the same role. Now let's look at the candidates we have and talk about the ability to mobilize people. Let's look at what kind of mobilization we want. Nigeria is a diverse, multicultural society where you have to be able to get us to move beyond our tribes and ethnicity to work together collectively for a common good. What vision do you have that inspires all of us to want to do that? How do you ensure that you have the right talent across the board? What do you do to make sure that institutions are able to become accountable and work together effectively? And I think, let me just make this point that we don't even talk about. In my own opinion, you are a failure ab initio if you want to talk about leadership in this country if you don't put women's agenda at the front of your agenda. You can't have 50% of the population who's not really pulling their potential. And you're constantly having a conversation. It irritates me when people talk about, oh, we don't have a Igbo leader, we don't have a Yoruba leader. Hey, well, what about the women? Why don't we have any woman vice president? Why don't we have any credible party having a woman as the head of Senate? And those people and women part of our population, and shouldn't they play a critical role? So that's example of what it means to have leadership.
Well, that brings me to the question, the leadership question that you've raised and you're trying to espouse, whether it's helped the country to really develop faster than it's supposed to be. Could it be the problems of parochialism, nepotism, ethnic jingoism?
I don't think the problem, I think that's the easy low-hanging fruit. I think the problem is that the Nigerian elite across all cultures are self-serving and narcissistic. The failure of our elite to recognize that the leadership is about service. It is not about being the big man. The kind of toxic masculinity that we see that exemplifies leadership. The kind of talk that you're a leader, you've got 50 cars following behind you. You're a leader, everybody's carrying your bag. That's not leadership, that's posturing. That's performance.
So now, you are the expert here. I like what you're saying and how you're putting it. So let's look ahead now. 2023 is around the corner. So what are those qualities that Nigerians who are watching you and I right now, what should we be looking out for before we cast our votes?
In my view, and this is my view, and it's extremely, it's extremely controversial. I'm not a populist. I don't seek popular opinion. But
we brought you into the studio for a reason, because we believe you have something for our viewers.
Yes, so I'm just forwarding you. So the first thing is, where are the women in your agenda? What is your vision for the whole of Nigeria, not just for a section, meaning men? What's your vision for the whole of Nigeria? That's number one. Because if you can change a lot of women, you change a lot of 50% of Nigeria, you change a lot of children, and you change a lot of the future. The second thing that is important to me, how do you build on what is on the ground? Never mind this game that politicians play all the time as if the person who came before them didn't do anything at all, and then we start from square one. What are you going to do to efficiently use our resources to build on whatever you think what we've got is? How do you build on that, not waste money? The third thing is that how do you ensure that young people recognize about producing and creating, and they have the space to work? Nigeria, the average age of Nigerians is 18. I'm not talking about their political posturing. I'm not talking about positions for them. I'm talking about them recognizing that it's not about your degree or your certificate. That's performance. It is about your competence, your character, your ability to be good and effective contributors to the society, a productive citizenship. Then increasingly we need, more critically, to have a system that recognizes our diversity and ensures that we are interdependent on each other. Let me qualify that by saying, when you play these games between Igbo, Yoruba, and Hausa, and you tag the Fulanis at the side, you do not recognize Nigeria. Yes, they form about 70% of the population, but we have over 380 different ethnic groups. What happens to those people? It becomes the tyranny of the majority. and you create a position where everybody is fighting to be recognized because of their ethnicity. So let's see how we celebrate ethnicity. And then we start talking about things like making sure that our judicial system, not just the police, because they are the low-hanging fruit here, the judicial system is improved, is accountable up to the judges and us lawyers, to make sure that you have a secure system. We are too young for this conversation about state police, because if you look at our governors, they're not as accountable as they should be. They don't even do their local government elections. Their judiciary is not independent. Their legislature is not independent.
So you suspect there will be abuse of power if state policing is introduced?
Certainly. If you're going to do that, then you need constitution for states. You need systems to hold them to account. If you don't even have press at state level. So how are you going to ensure that this is not used for one state against each other?
And let's look at the issue of competence when it comes to leadership. You didn't talk so much about the youths and the rest. Who, well, I think a bit of the youth system and the youth board, who are really the drivers of any country. Where can they get the competence when the Academic Staff Union of Universities have been on strike now for, this is the 8th month ongoing, and nobody seems to be budging. Where does that leave a country like Nigeria?
Well, I think we had a conversation months ago about this, if you can recall. And I said to you, we are going to end up with taking the university off government. If you don't take the university system off, the university is not an entitlement. It is mostly elite. If you look at the population of Nigerians that go to university, they are less than the percentage of young people that manage to go to university are insignificant. So what you need to do is make sure that university education is properly funded and is not dependent on government. Government provides a subsidy, but universities become systems where people can go to university, pay for university. Universities also make monies and make themselves their research systems that are known worldwide and develop themselves. Because if you look at it, if you keep on subsidizing university education, you're subsidizing it for the rest of the world.
Right.
The mobility of people across the world, you train them to go other countries, they'll get work.
Hey, we're seeing a jackpot phenomenon, which of course, this is not the first time we're seeing a mass exodus of Nigerians, especially young Nigerians. But we're not concerned. Yes, it is
these
concerning.
are professionals.
The numbers of Nigerian youths, especially professionals who are leaving, is quite alarming. But let's talk about the country Nigeria, because at the end of the day, you need a country to call home, no matter where you find yourself. 2023 elections, some analysts believe that the youth will play a key role in determining who becomes the next leader. If you look at, the registration by INEC recently, we saw a huge number, even though, that is the register is being filtered down now from what we have heard. But looking at that, the impact of the youth on the election, do you think the youths, with how much we've seen them galvanize in recent months, do you think they'll be able to change the politics of Nigeria from what it used to be? Are you optimistic?
I don't think they have the character yet, in my view. You see, the unfortunate thing is that they are also performative. They're also about performance. You have to look at the character of our people. If you are going to be accountable to the rest of Nigerians, if you are going to move away from the scarcity mentality, where I'm all right and I don't care what happens to the next man, you have to remember Nigeria was the place whereby if you had a job, you had about 50 people in the village that depended on you. You had to be able to look after your next door neighbor or your fellow people. There was community. Right now, there's no community. Everybody's looking out for themselves. And that's, even if it's young people or old people, we are not going to change it until we have that responsibility for each other. We become effective citizens of Nigeria, caring for each other, working for each other, knowing that if we make the system better, it will be better for our children and their children. Sometimes you have to sacrifice for things to be better for the next generation. But if our young people are only about what they are going to consume, not what they are going to produce,
can
if
we
they are
really
talking
say
about
that with
comfort,
what you've seen? At the end of the day, 82 million Nigerians are registered to vote. And of course, we've seen more numbers. We can't really, until INEC comes and tells us after they've cleaned the register. But for now, what we know, 82 million Nigerians, over 45% of them are young people.
Yes.
You don't think that number is significant enough?
I'm not saying the number is
things?
not going to be significant.
So it's not a question of the number. So what is the challenge? Why are the youths not going to be able to make an inroad and especially decide who becomes our next leader.
Let me just quickly add this, why do you think the youths cannot make the inroad when the world is opening up to the youths becoming presidents, from New Zealand to Sweden to the Scandinavian countries?
Austria,
why is the
all over the
narrative
place.
different in Nigeria? In the First Republic, how old was Gowon when he was head of state? 32 years. So why can't a 32-year-old man be president in Nigeria?
I have not said all of those
Capacity,
things.
competence.
Okay, can I
Go on.
comment? I've not said that it's not possible for a young person to be president, and in fact, it's more ideal. But what you start to see and what you start to understand is that it is about your character that matters, not your age. People can be 64 and not be mature enough. And people can be 30 and more mature than a 64-year-old. I'm quite sure you've seen that in your life. Age does not determine maturity, and it does not determine your experience, exposure, and wisdom. What we need is people who have the skills and capacity. By the way, the numbers assumes that young people are going to think exactly the same way. The reality is that, like all Nigerians, we are very individualistic. And so everybody's going to vote according to their touch point. If you now determine that age is the critical identity and you vote according to age, it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I don't think people are going to do that. They're going to vote on their concerns, they're going to vote on their affiliations, they're going to vote on their aspirations, and they're going to determine what they want, and they're not going to do an age group voting. You're not going to see that.
So the continuous voter registration exercise really might not have gotten the impact that we thought it had, from what you're saying.
What impact did you want?
Are you feeling
And young
any
people are
phenomenon, in the air, in the atmosphere, in the Nigerian political, firmament right now? Is there any kind of fervor that you see?
I think that the social networks have created a space for a particular digitalized exposure. That means people's opinion matters. It means that they're expressing themselves more directly, and they're influencing the direction of people who are listening to them. But remember, most people are going to make their decision very close to the election and on very, very pedestrian grounds.
So irrespective of all the crowds we're seeing across the country, things might not just be...
Crowds don't determine votes. You might go to a nightclub the night before and say, oh God, I can't be bothered. Everybody will vote in the right direction. We'll see how it goes.
So how do we get it right, as we wrap up, briefly?
I think participation. Election is not democracy. It's part of democracy, but it's not democracy. We need a system whereby people participate all year round, where young people's voice are heard on critical issues, whether it's in the National Assembly, it's in the judiciary, it's in the police, that young people actually are participants in building Nigeria, not just spectators until an election.
Well, Adewale Ajadi, I'm sure the Nigerian youths are looking at your submissions very critically. The women, of course, will be happy with you because you're behind them too, just like we all are behind
35%
them. And we really want
that
affirmative action, to come to play. Adewale Ajadi, lawyer and public affairs analyst, thanks so very much for coming on News.